Hey everyone, good afternoon. I am back live, back from vacation. I was very happily in Colorado and New Mexico, and I had a nice time visiting family and got to see some really cool nature stuff and got to relax with my family. It was wonderful. While I was away, you all were busy in summer school. This is based on a 9-part lecture series that I did about a year ago. And this is the same lecture series I go around in my community in North Carolina doing, but also we went into a professional studio and recorded these lectures. And what they really are based on is the pillars of brain health for older adults. So if you are wondering if that includes you, most research studies use the cutoff of about age 65 to define an older adult. Maybe that's you directly. Maybe you care about someone who is a little bit older. But really, as we get older, the greatest risk that we have to our brain health comes from these things that I focus on in the lecture series. And so what I wanted to do is empower older adults with evidence-based information to try to get people away from the too good to be true brain fitness industry promises. And my concern is that, of course, they are a waste of money in my and many other colleagues' opinions, but also they can really waste people's time. If you're busy playing these brain games that they tell you are going to help your brain be stronger and healthier and reverse age-related memory problems or even dementia, you're not going to be spending your time doing the things that science actually tells us are going to help. But maybe worst of all is the impact on people's hope. Many people are spending money on products, so these are the supplements, the vitamins, the brain games, all sorts of things are out there. This is an $8 to $10 billion industry, and they really think it's going to make a difference. And I think that that is really cruel if you are someone who is interested in brain health because you have loved someone that has had a dementia, maybe specifically Alzheimer's disease. You know that it can be very heart-wrenching, and you would do anything to take away that person's suffering, your own suffering. And a lot of these products are very expensive and have very little, if any, remote shred of scientific evidence behind them. But yet we've got this huge body of literature that talks about the importance of things like high quality REM sleep, an anti-inflammatory diet specifically, cardiovascular exercise, the importance of not being chronically stressed out, how to genuinely improve your memory. There's thousands and thousands of research articles that have been written on these things. So what I decided to do in my frustration, honestly, in my disgust against the brain fitness industry, was to spend time, a year or 2 years, going through all this literature and distilling it down to these pillars of brain health. So in each summer school, we were offering you a little bit of a free intro here on Facebook, like we like to do every week. And then you all were invited to come over and watch the hour-long professional lecture, kind of like you would see me do if you were able to come here and see me in person. And we were so happy to be able to offer it for only $5. I would love to be able to send these things out for free, but as you would see if you were able to be one of our participants, it is a pretty professional setup and it takes us a lot of money to be able to do these things. We are very focused on keeping brain health as affordable as we possibly can. We are not here to sell any type of overhyped product or supplement or vitamin or anything like that. We are really in the market of getting you information. And I think the way we present that information matters. We try to do it here on Facebook weekly and put a lot of time into these lectures, and I know you all appreciate them so much. But there are also times where we want to make it look really beautiful and visually appealing, and we put together something that is more of a professional product. And it's a big investment on our end, and we're just trying to basically break even. So what I wanted to do tonight was to take questions from all of you wonderful people who have been interested in summer school and just give some feedback about anything maybe a lecture made you think of, or maybe it didn't answer a question that you have. It is still going on until July 31st, and like I said, it's $5 a lecture, and they're typically about an hour long. You can go on our website, which is www.icareforyourbrain.com, which is icfyb.com/summer school, and you're able to get in there and pick from the different lectures that you want. It is 9 lectures. The very first one is Understanding the Aging Brain, What's Normal, When to Worry. And the reason this one is important is, yes, it is an intro, and I teach you all about the brain basics that you have to know in order to make sense of the next kind of more higher level lectures, but also it's very important to know where your level of anxiety should be with your brain health, with your memory as you get older, because this is one of the #1 selling points of memory products of the brain fitness industry. It is taking very normal things that happen to people as they age, let's say misplacing your keys, not remembering an acquaintance's name very quickly right off the bat. They take these very normal instances and they basically exploit them to make you worried that this is the tip of the dementia iceberg, that this is going to be the beginning of something very horrible for you and your family, and boy, do you need to rush in and buy their product in order to stem the tide. So I really wanted to educate you about right down the middle of what is normal and what is not normal. We also talk about things that are pretty basic education in the world of neuropsychology, which is, what is the definition of dementia? Is dementia the same thing as Alzheimer's disease, right? And we talk about the fact that dementia is a big old umbrella, and it basically means that in one or more major cognitive areas like word finding or learning or memory, there's been a significant decline. And that decline is so significant that it impacts on your ability to remain independent in everyday life. The things that we often look at are driving, remembering to take your medications, and maybe most sensitively, being able to manage your finances, complex finances. So when those things happen, we know that this meets the criteria for dementia. It's really through neuropsychological testing, which is what I do, what other board certified neuropsychologists do, paper and pencil testing, looking at your medical records in detail, looking at your medical history, your medications, your education, all sorts of important things, how you're doing now in your everyday life. They all come together, and it all helps us understand a pattern. And that is really what we are trained to do, is to interpret a pattern of behavior, a pattern of the way the brain is functioning, to figure out what subtype of dementia it is we're looking at. Now, why does that matter? Why can't we just say, this is dementia, that's it? Well, it matters because personalized brain health care can only happen when we are targeting what is relevant for that person individually, right? And so what we do for somebody who has vascular dementia after, say, 1 or more significant strokes is not going to be what we do for the person with Alzheimer's disease. It's not going to be what we do for the lady with Lewy body dementia. So neuropsychological evaluation is a key thing that I talk about in lecture 1, because I want you to understand what exactly my particular expertise is and how other neuropsychologists across the country, across the world, are available to partner with you and to really be able to figure out what's going on with you and a loved one. It's only once you know what's going on that you can take personalized steps to target everything to make sure you're minimizing its impact. In lecture number 2, we talk about dementia and all of the different risk factors that happen across the lifespan. Dementia is not something that you should really just care about when you turn 65, when you become an older adult. There are risk factors that are evident when we are carrying children in our womb that happen throughout toddlerhood, through young adulthood. And so in that lecture, we go through all the different developmental stages and talk about what science knows about them and how to reduce them. Then we talk in lecture 3 about heart health equaling brain health. This is probably the top 1 or 2 most important things to understand about the brain, and it is how incredibly important your vascular health, your circulation, the ability of your blood to move freely throughout your body, how important that is to your brain health. So we go through all the different risk factors like high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, untreated sleep apnea, chronic stress, too much alcohol, go through all of that and talk specifically about how it impacts the brain and what you can do for yourself or a loved one to take that risk and make it as small as it can possibly be. So I see we have a couple questions percolating here, which is awesome. I'm just going to go through this brief review of summer school and then we're going to get to the questions. So now we are at lecture 4. This, I would say, is maybe the crowd favorite. This one is about how different substances affect the aging brain. So when I say substances, I mean things all the way from diet. What are the best foods to eat? And this isn't because, we've read what the industry would like us to think is best for the brain, which is a lot of how the information is out there. This goes all the way from the turmeric industry all the way to the salmon industry. We actually know based on science that there are many, many important things that we should be putting in our body. So what we do is go through that exact diet, exactly what you should be eating for brain health. But we also talk about the things like the impact of prescription medications on the brain. That's a very important thing. As you get older, that age group takes more medications than any other group. There are many, many unintended interaction effects that can happen between different medications. And so we need to be talking about this concept of polypharmacy. We also talk about alcohol. The way we interact with alcohol has to change as we get older. We have a different tolerance. Our kidneys, our livers work differently. It affects our brain differently. And if no one is talking to us about what the recommendations are and how they change, we're potentially doing something that's harmful to us without really even knowing why. Number 5 is the psychology of aging. This is talking about the unique stressors that come along with getting older. I think that those of us who have not walked in those shoes yet, we don't really know what it is to be a 70-year-old person in the world today. If you look at the research for what stresses that age group out, I think it's fascinating. The most stressful thing that older adults report is the state of the world today. What is the state of the world and how we're leaving it for future generations? This is related to the environment, the reliance on electronics and going out everywhere and seeing everybody on their personal phone. So we talk about this. We talk about how to cope most successfully with things like not being in the same physical condition that you once were. We talk about mental strategies for loss, maybe having to move out of your home, losing multiple friends in a short amount of time. It's really important that we make that connection between mental health and brain health. And that really is why I chose neuropsychology, why a lot of my colleagues are in our exact position of expertise, because we don't just value the brain as a 3-pound organ. We really care about you, the person, the mental health, the spiritual health, the physical health, the cognitive health. That is really true brain health. And that's really where the brain fitness industry is getting it so wrong, is that they're really just thinking that one simple intervention like a pill or an app or a brain game can influence the health of something so infinitely complex as the brain. Just not going to happen, right? So in lecture 6, we talk about the importance of social connection. This is maybe my favorite lecture because we talk about how inherently social we are as human beings. We are the social animal, and isolation is one of the most damaging things for mental health, for spiritual health, for physical health, and of course, brain health. When I see these brain games that they advertise for all this money and these membership fees, I want to pull my hair out, because the most brain stimulating brain health game that's out there is conversation with another human being, and really working on how to be an active, good listener and being able to talk about things that are of interest back and forth with someone actually through eye contact. So in this lecture, we go through some cool stuff like what parts of the brain have been specifically chosen over time to be developed that are just focused on interpersonal contact, eye contact, remembering faces, really some very fascinating stuff. In Lecture 7, we talk about memory. So many people are drawn to brain health in the news and in the media because they are worried about memory. That's what drives a lot of people to read articles, to buy the pills, to buy the supplements. So I wanted to spend a whole hour with you talking about what are the evidence-based recommendations for truly improving memory. And you can really break them down into two camps. There's internal strategies, which are things you can actually do within your own self consciously, kind of what we call this metacognitive thinking about thinking. And then there are external strategies. These are the things that you can actually put outside your brain, outside your body, the way you keep your calendar, the way you do your to-do list, reminders, alarms, other people, the way you structure your environment. These are the things that we can do to support memory outside of us. But we also go through the medications that are out there for different forms of dementia. And I think that it's really, really interesting because what you really take away from it is how unbelievably complex memory is. Memory is just not as simple as, oh, I have this experience and something pops into my brain. Memory is exceedingly complex, going all the way from the senses, being able to take something in, pay attention to it, ignore distractions in the environment, take that information actually into your memory, turn it from something that is of interest to you, that you're focused on, and actually do something we call consolidation, which is the forming of memory. This involves sleep, REM sleep, being in a relatively stable mood. There has to be relatively low stress in the environment. There's many, many different things. And then we have to store the memory once we've made the memory. And then we have to find the memory once we've actually stored it and made it. And all these things happen in different parts of the brain, and that's what we focus on in that lecture. So then we come to number 8. This is also a very popular one. This is how sleep changes with age. If you are getting a little bit up in years, I wonder if you can chime in and tell us if you've noticed that your sleep has changed. Most patients of mine tell me their sleep cycle kind of shifts a little bit, and they seem to go to bed earlier in the evening, and they seem to get up earlier in the morning. And they also don't feel like they're sleeping as deeply. And this is really related to hormonal changes. So we go through a lot of education about melatonin, why there is a role for possible supplementation, but oftentimes people are getting the dosing wrong, and that's a really critical piece of information. We also talk about how poor sleep impacts memory and mood. One of the functions of deep sleep is to review your day and decide what it is you want to turn into a memory and what you can forget. If we aren't getting into good long sleep cycles, we are not having that review process in our memory, and that can really lead to significant memory impairment. The last lecture in summer school is a review where I distill down my top 10 recommendations based on science, not hype, not products, to really inform and instruct you exactly what it is you're supposed to be doing. So what I'm going to do now is look back on some of these questions, and Diane had asked me to talk a little bit about stress. Stress is a really important thing to talk about because it is perfectly fine in the short term. Our bodies have very sophisticated biological systems to manage stress in the here and now. We have a fight or flight system. We have a parasympathetic nervous system. We have an autonomic nervous system. And basically, it's there to, in an instant, help us rally. Our heart starts pumping. The stress hormones get released from the brain and the adrenal glands that sit on top of the kidneys. And basically, we get a burst of energy. Our skeletal muscles are fully fueled, and we can go, we can run, we can fight, we can freeze. We have a lot of physiological energy. Once the threat or the stressor passes, the idea is that that system has built-in recuperating systems, and we are able to reboot. But how many of you out there rarely feel stressed? That's not the way, especially Americans, are living right now. There is an American stress survey that happens every year. The vast majority of people, on a scale of 0, which means no stress, 10 is like totally stressed out. Most people say I'm living at least a 6 or above, and many people, I think it's 25%, say that they're at an 8 or above always, consistently. This is very problematic for many reasons. As it relates to brain health, over time when we are exposed to cortisol, Some people have used the metaphor of battery acid in the brain, that it's literally percolating the neurons in the brain cells, and it does structural damage. It has physiological properties that are very unhealthy and unkind to brain cells, specifically in the memory centers of the brain, the hippocampus. This is why if someone has had many decades of very traumatic events that have led to post-traumatic stress disorder, there's a lot of research that talks about that their brain centers are actually smaller than in other people who have not been exposed to such stressful things. The other thing is that it interferes with sleep, right? So one of the other functions of deep sleep is that we review highly emotionally traumatic events. This is part of nightmares, is once we get into that REM sleep cycle and we're actually doing the review of our day. And remember, what the brain cares about, what all cells in the body that carry DNA care about, is survival. It just wants to learn the lessons in order to go on and to procreate, really. It's that simple. And so you're going to go through the threats, the emotional threats, the physical threats, financial threats, all of that. If it gets to be too much and your brain can't really work out the story and make sense and figure out what has happened, this is when we often wake up from a nightmare. This interrupts REM sleep, and you don't get to just hop back into REM sleep once you're up from deep sleep. You have to start the whole sleep cycle over again, and you've got to go through 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and by that time you can get back into REM sleep. So if you're not able to go naturally through all of the sleep cycles, you're never really getting into that brain space where you're making the memories. You're never getting into that brain space where you're processing emotionally traumatic events. This is why some people now think of PTSD as a sleep disorder, because it's so intimately tied with deep sleep. The other problem is that stress and psychological worry and anxiety is very distracting in the here and now. We only have a little bit of attention span. We have 7 slots basically. Some people a little more, some people a little less. In a perfect world, you've got 7 slots to take in information. If some of your slots are filled up by constantly churning over a worry, a stressor, a relationship you can't figure out, you are narrowing your scope of attention. Attention is the gateway to making memories. Think of all the things that are happening to you, never mind internally, just right now in your external environment. Part of memory and paying good attention is not only the focusing part, but it's also the suppressing the attention that you might be paying to other things in your environment. You have to do a lot of ignoring. You must ignore distractions if you're able to actually focus on something and make a memory. That requires that as many of those 7 slots as possible can be open, right? So if you've got all this churning and you're stressed and you're constantly scanning your environment for a threat and you're so worried you can't make ends meet, you're literally walking around with this tiny little lens going through life, and you're not going to be catching everything. A lot of things is going to be going by the wayside. And so it may feel like you have a bad memory. This is really the job of a neuropsychologist. When people come to see us, is we have to figure out, is the memory problem really a memory problem, that someone can't make new memories, which is in essence what happens in Alzheimer's? Or is it that they're so scattered, they're so anxious, they're so inattentive that they actually aren't even hearing and taking in the information that's happening in the environment? But somehow, what I worry about is that chronic stress is so the norm now. People identify as just being a stressed person, or, that's the whole, we're so busy all the time, everything I do is so important. If you really look at your lifestyle and your day in and your day out, and you really think that you stay chronically stressed often, that's a serious threat, again, to your physical health, your mental health, but also, hopefully, a convincing point of view is that now it also hurts your brain health. And so what we have to talk about are coping strategies, and that's a big part of what we do in lecture 5. So just one of the things that we try to teach people in that lecture is assertive communication. It is unbelievable how much stress has to do with people feeling like they don't stand up for themselves with other people. And we all do this, and we're all guilty of taking it, and then what happens when we get up to here over time? We lash out, and that's really the definition of passive-aggressive communication. Well, it turns out being passive-aggressive is one of the most stressful ways to go through life. But yet we all feel so afraid to be assertive. And so part of what I argue in the lecture is that a lot of us have just not learned how to be respectfully assertive, right? We're more comfortable protecting other people's feelings, or sometimes we can get into these irritable moods where we're kind of lashing out and we don't know how to prioritize giving someone maybe some constructive feedback. And so I worked really hard to try to come up with a set of really good coping skills in that lecture that you can take and learn, and you'd be amazed at how you can reduce your stress level just by feeling like you know your boundaries, you know where your line is, and you're not necessarily going to let somebody cross that line. All right, so here we have Dave. He says, why do I only sleep 3 to 4 hours and wake up even though I don't have a need to get up? A lot of times, Dave, that has to do for all older adults with melatonin. So melatonin is that sleep hormone that our pineal gland, right, kind of in the center of our brain, excretes, but also, interestingly, every single cell in your body actually excretes melatonin, okay? So it's really cool if you look at a graph of the lifespan. Newborn babies make almost no melatonin whatsoever. When we make our very most melatonin is throughout childhood. So it typically starts around 3 to 4 years old and kind of peaks around 18 or 19. And if you think of children, if you have children in your life, that is when they're sleeping 10, 11, 12 hours a night. Well, the melatonin starts to go down more and more, and by the time we hit age 60 or so, it is looking low, 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 and by the time we're about 70, we're making very, very, very little melatonin. This is why it's maybe one of 2 supplements that I actually recommend if you do it properly. Many people take much too much melatonin. It's very important to take the least amount that you can actually take. I see 10 and 30 milligrams being sold at the drugstore. I think that's crazy because our brain only makes maybe about 0.5 micrograms. So there's a big difference between what is biologically normal and what exactly there is on the market. And we all fall prey to that, oh, it's natural, oh, more is better, right? Well, that's really not the case. So I would say it's a couple things, Dave. Could be the melatonin, but also we know that there's a lot of medical conditions that can interrupt sleep. The first one that comes to mind are changes in how much urine the bladder can hold, both for men and women as we get older. For men, of course, the prostate plays a big role there. For women, it seems to be a drop in estrogen. But other things too, like people who have diabetes, a lot of times 3 or 4 hours is the span after you've had your last meal. So you might get a little bit of a dip in blood sugar, and that kind of wakes you up. Sleep apnea, that would be an important thing to ask if someone hears you sleep or sleeps in the bed with you. Do you snore? Do you seem to gasp for breath? When you have an apnea, you stop breathing, and that is an alarm. That's an emergency in the body. And what it does is you go for this big giant inhale of air, and it wakes you up temporarily. You might not be conscious of it, but you are waking up. And then many times people are having a really hard time getting back into the sleep cycle. So that's pretty dangerous. I think Spencer had asked about exercise, and his question was, I think something like, why is it so good? If you look through the literature on brain health, cardiovascular exercise time and time again for a variety of mental health issues comes back as the #1 recommendation. So why is this? Well, of course, it gets your blood pumping, and in the blood, we've got all the fuel for the brain, right? The oxygen and the glucose. Brain cells cannot hold on to these fuels, maybe about 7 to 9 minutes of storage after that. That's when we see damage to cells. That's why it's so critical to get yourself to an urgent medical environment if you think you're having a stroke or a heart attack, cardiac arrest, anything like that, because the brain cells can't, after 7 to 9 minutes, that's when we really get into the danger zone. After about 11 to 12 to 13 minutes, we know we're going to have large groups of brain cells that are going to die, and that's when we see some of the long-term impairments that happen with different brain health issues. So we need that constant and steady supply of the blood, which brings the fuel. But what's really cool in the last few years is we actually know that moderate exercise also brings helps with the development of something called nerve growth factor hormones. And these are amazing molecules in the brain that actually help bring some brain cells that maybe have been damaged, but not quite to the point where they've died, back to life. They can start to regrow different blood vessels. We can start to get little dendrites, little fingers on different brain cells, and then networks of brain cells over time with a lot of this hormone are able to hopefully connect and take over some of the jobs of some of the other parts of the brain that have maybe been damaged. There are a few clinical disorders now that are getting a lot of attention in terms of cardiovascular exercise. And the biggest one right now is probably Parkinson's disease. If any of you are out there with PD or know someone with PD, there is the whole movement of Rock Steady Boxing, which is a wonderful, amazing program where they use the science to inform an exercise movement program, which I love. I love that bridge between the science back down to clinical care, to medicine, to how to help people. And the idea is you're doing very specific things that we know are going to increase the dopamine in someone's brain naturally. The latest, I would say, the cutting edge is using all that information we know about exercise and also incorporating some cognitive tasks. And the idea is dual task management. So the idea is we're actually going back and forth between doing something pretty intensive with our brain, a lot of times some kind of switching, kind of going through a puzzle or a maze, calling up different things in our brain where we're kind of having to go back and forth between left brain and right brain, while you're doing some type of intensive exercise. So many of us are predicting that the future of brain health is going to be incorporating rehab therapies, not so much staying in our lane of physical therapy or occupational therapy or recreation therapy or speech therapy, but we're going to find hybrids and ways to incorporate different types of elements of programs together. And my hope is that we can then take the next step to personalize rehab therapies and realize that what's good for one person might not necessarily be good for the other person. And that before someone had, say, a stroke or an AVM or a brain tumor, their whole brain was wired in a very unique way with their interests, their hobbies, their family history, their education. And we have to use all of that background, all of those networks, as the basis of how we inform rehab therapies, right? Because if you're someone who has gone your whole life being an expert pool player, and now all of a sudden we're doing rehab therapies and we're completely, you're unable to use one of your arms because of a stroke, and so we think, well, you can't play pool, we're missing a giant opportunity to get you as good as we possibly can because we're not using any of those networks that have to do with the ball, the chalk, the colors, the spatial orientation, the strategy, the interpersonal. There's so many elements that go into a hobby that we have to be able to call in order to really personalize brain rehab. And that is a great segue to reminding you about our stroke recovery guide. So this has been our project for the last 2 years. Stroke is the most common neurological injury that happens worldwide. And upon looking at the support out there for long-term recovery of stroke symptoms, I was very unimpressed. I did not think that I could find a resource where enough of the general rules came together. It is challenging to guide recovery because everyone's brain is different, everyone's brain injury is different, and therefore everyone's recovery is going to be different. So you have to find these universal truths that anyone could latch into, but yet personalize. And I also wasn't happy with what I saw out there in terms of psychological impact of stroke. The definition of a trauma is that something comes out of the blue. It was not expected. It was life-threatening. If that isn't the definition of a stroke, I don't know what is. And so if we just focus on physiological recovery after stroke, we are missing, again, a huge opportunity to get people well and to get them healing. And we are creating an environment where other things can start to fester, like post-stroke depression. Post-stroke, post-traumatic stress disorder is a very real thing, and people develop debilitating anxiety when they're reminded in their body of a sensation or a feeling that reminds them of their stroke, a certain kind of a headache. but also the way the brain is, you know, the way the light was on the day that you found out you had a brain tumor, the way food tasted when you came out of the craniotomy. This is how anxiety works. It's here, and then it generalizes and it grows to the point where your life can become very small and your anxiety can become very big. And so I really wanted to put forward a guide that also respected and valued the psychological impact of stroke. And so we are having a special right now on the stroke guide. The price is down to $22. It's 116 pages, and it's something we worked really, really hard on. We've gotten great feedback, and that's on our website right now. Again, www.icare4yourbrain.com/deal, right? Guide? B-Day, B-Day. Oh my goodness. Okay, it was for my B-Day, and I'm having B-Day amnesia. Thank you so much, Fran, for welcoming me back. You're always so sweet, so supportive. Hey, Margaret. Hello, Emily. You guys are just absolutely amazing. It's really, really fun to be back. I'm really enthusiastic about what's to come in the future. I will be back with you next week, and I'm actually going to be revisiting Essential Tremor, and we'll have a promo out soon that we can all share that to get folks aware. But Essential Tremor is the most common movement disorder. A lot of people out there have it, about 5 to 6% of people. And a bunch of folks have been writing to me and asking me to research what makes essential tremor worse, what makes it progress. So I am in the midst of doing a lot of research about that, and that's what I will talk about next Wednesday when I am back at 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I'm also going to be doing a couple podcasts about the Stroke Recovery Guide in the next few weeks. One will be on Stroke TV with my buddy Jerry. Then I'm also going to do a podcast called Strokecast with Bill Monroe that I'm really excited about. And there's just a bunch of new brain advocates and brain superstars that I've been meeting over on Instagram that I'm excited to bridge worlds and get you guys into their heads and vice versa. So thank you guys all so much. I so appreciate being here. I really think being a neuropsychologist is the best job in the whole world. And I hope by watching these lectures, you get to know a little bit more about what we do and what we care about, because I really think that we are an amazing care partner. If any of you are out there and you want to find a me close to you, please email us, message us, give us your zip code, and we will find a wonderful board-certified neuropsychologist to help you through whatever brain health challenge you may have. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.